talking about the Cup Series at Pocono. Let's talk about the tire tests that have happened this year really quick. We have seen that drivers and teams that are a part of the Goodyear tire test this year have shown improvements whenever we've gotten to those tracks compared to how they have ran without them. The biggest bump has been the RFK group from how they ran this year at regular tracks. And then once they got to a track they had been at before, or at least with a tire for, we've seen that Buescher and Keselowski as a whole and that whole organization was able to improve. We've also seen that with the Toyota teams. Joe Gibbs, I don't know why I said Toyota teams. We've seen that with Joe Gibbs Racing this year as well, and Hendrick. And so when we're looking in Penske, like whatever track certain teams have gone to, we've seen that they at least arrived at the track with a setup that can compete. They're not having to guess. And so this week, entering the Pocono weekend, we need to pay attention to the people who went out and tested these tires in May. Christopher Bell, Eric Almirola, and Daniel Suarez. I don't think it's necessarily for Eric Almirola, but for Christopher Bell and Joe Gibbs Racing, and for Daniel Suarez and Trackhouse, I think this elevates them and gets them on par to race competitively this weekend. I understand that last year's race was a doubleheader, back-to-back days, and it was an invert of the top 20 for day 2. I understand that. However, we can still learn a lot from the Pocono races last year, and what we learned, and I understand it's a different car, but one thing that we learned is how teams are preparing and how close their simulator work is compared to what they're showing up to the track at. We've seen that happen last year. We saw that happen during COVID, and we've seen it happen this year with the shorter practice sessions. So when we look at Pocono this week, and we look at the salaries, and we look at guys that can compete for the win, and guys that are going to be up there competing for these, hey, lo and behold, top 3 are Joe Gibbs drivers. It's pretty crazy, kind of cuckoo, real cray-cray, that I've been harping on Kyle Busch, Hamlin, and Truex all through the spring, all through the summer. They're up here. I told you, you got to buy cheap, you got to buy low. It's here now. Everybody sees the data where Joe Gibbs is at. It's no longer a secret. So Kyle Busch, Hamlin, and Truex, all, in my opinion, are going to compete this weekend. When we look at Kyle Busch winning the second race last year, he lost a gear, able to save fuel based on that. And that's his whole famous fly like an eagle meme, which I swear, if I got to hear that again, I am just going to pull a Justin Wilson and just find debris to hit me in the head. And I just don't want to hear that Kyle Busch singing Fly Like an Eagle again. When we're looking at the rest of the people here and how they have ran, Kyle Busch is probably the favorite going in. Pearce talked about it in his article and in his price check video, and I was going to talk about it as well, is William Byron. $9,200, a guy who has been absolutely stupid consistent, both at Pocono and this year, shown a lot of speed at the intermediate tracks, and at a price tag that isn't insane. Like $9,200 for William Byron is a pretty steep discount. I like the Hendrick guys here, and clearly Hendrick, Joe Gibbs, and Trackhouse are going to be the guys competing for the win. I think it's Joe Gibbs slightly above everybody else, and then it's going to be Trackhouse and Hendrick competing right beside each other for that second spot. So Chase Elliott at 10-1, Chastain at 10,000. I think those make incredible plays. Kyle Larson, really quiet this year. Not like, oh my gosh, it's kind of interesting. Kyle Larson has been kind of quiet this year compared to last year. No, it's pretty like shocking how quiet these guys have been. When we look at real rating and how Larson has been performing, Nashville 9th, Gateway 13th. I don't know why I brought a Gateway. Charlotte 9th, Kansas 3rd, Dover 8th, Las Vegas 4th. This whole year so far, Larson has just not been a top 5 guy in terms of speed. Now, he was at Kansas. He's been there on the fringe, but he just hasn't been killing the field like he has been, or like he was last year. And so I think 9-8 is a bit overpriced for Larson. And if anything, I like Elliott. I like Byron a lot more than Larson this weekend. And hell, even Alex Bowman at 8-1, when we look at how he's been running, I understand that, last 2 months haven't been extremely kind to him. When we look at Alex Bowman in terms of his real rating, 14th Charlotte, 10th at Kansas, 4th at Dover, even second in Las Vegas. This is a situation where I think Hendrick can perform better than how they have been. And that's another thing with how the NASCAR schedule goes. Clearly, you guys are not new to DFS. But we haven't been to a racetrack since Charlotte, that leans into the intermediate family, that leans into that type of data. And I mentioned it when it was the end of May, that really June and July, this month we're just really seeing, clearly we saw New Hampshire, we're seeing Pocono, we got 2 road courses, Atlanta, we really took a month off this month outside of here at Pocono from the data that we saw in May, that we saw in April. And so I understand that we haven't seen Bowman run in the top 10 a lot recently, but when we get to intermediate tracks, that's what we're going back to leaning on. And so fully lean into what you see at Charlotte, Kansas, Darlington, Dover, these tracks here, just because, he hasn't been running that well. And Nashville, I understand he got wrecked in Nashville. Very unfortunate. I forget Nashville is in there. Nashville is another data point I would look at. But when you look at Bowman, the guy has not had speed in the top 13 since Kansas. Charlotte was 14th. He hasn't been performing that well, but for $8,100, I think that's a very easy price tag for Alex Bowman to pay off here at a track that I think Hendrick is going to show up and be very competitive at. I think this is a place where Penske is probably going to struggle the most. We didn't really necessarily see a ton of speed from the Penske drivers. Yes, Logano was very, very fast and in the stat lines looking great at Darlington, but you got to remember, most of the freaking guys who were competitive in that race got wrecked out. Chastain, Hamlin, Kyle Busch, Truex all ran into issues at that race and didn't get to be there at the end, even though Truex actually was anyway, why. Logano won that race, was up front, moved Byron out of the way late. Yet again, bringing up Byron again. Both these guys took advantage at Darlington from, the main groups of guys wrecking out, but they were there. When we're looking at this weekend's race here, I think it'd be easier for me to determine who I have little interest in right now, and then we'll go back and look through how people have been performing. But I'm not interested in Logano. I understand Blaney has ran extremely well and has a lot of laps inside the top 5 this year. But when we look specifically at Charlotte, Kansas, Darlington, all poor finishes. Not what we need for DFS. When we look at how he's running in terms of speed, 8th best at Nashville, 22nd best at Charlotte, 9th at Kansas, 13th Darlington, 15th at Dover. I'm just not leaning Penske here, okay? And I understand that Stewart-Haas is making some improvements, and specifically Harvick has been running pretty decent this year, back to top 10 speeds. I understand, 10th best at Darlington, 10th best at Dover, 17th best at Kansas, 16th at Charlotte. But yet again, going back to tire tests that Eric Almirola did, I think that data that they brought there is going to elevate Harvick a little bit more, at least make him maybe not like competitive for the lead, but show up to the track with a car they can actually improve speed on instead of trying to catch up with where the field is this week at Pocono. Chase Crisco, 8,700. I don't think he's going to do it because he's been relying a lot on place differential lately. And so right now, going through the drivers right now, Logano, Blaney, and Briscoe, guys that I'm just not interested in. I'm just not wanting to lean towards. And once you get back to this range, we got Kurt Busch. Excuse me. Showing good speed. I'm wanting to see them run better. Clearly ran away, had the best car at Kansas, but man, just not enough to really lean on. I want to see practice data from Kurt Busch. I think Tyler Reddick struggles here. I'm not very excited to see I'm not very excited to see how Tyler Reddick does. 9th and 11th last year, but just not screaming anything towards Reddick this weekend. I've already said that I really, really, really am interested in Alex Bowman. I really like Daniel Suarez at $7,900. I think that is a terrible misprice when we look at Charlotte, 6th best car at Charlotte. When we look at Kansas, I understand it's 20th. When we look at Darlington, 9th best at Darlington. Keep everybody in the race that should have been up there. Suarez probably falls back to around the 13th, 14th best car at Charlotte or at Darlington. But I think Bowman, I think Suarez make a ton of sense this week. Eric Almirola going to the tire test. He's been here, understands what the car is going to feel like. I think that does elevate him a little bit, not to a top 5 contender, but certainly a guy who can balance and fight his way into 12th or 11th. I'm very much interested in him, and I would actually rather go to Eric Almirola over Bubba Wallace, over Keselowski, over Cindric, and over Austin Dillon. It just depends on what Eric Jones brings to the table. Eric Jones was showing, you got to remember that it's been a while since we've been to the intermediate tracks, but showing quite a bit of speed at these intermediate tracks. 13th best car at Charlotte. Bit slow, ran into issues, and Kansas was the tire fiasco, the lug nut issue for Eric Jones, because Eric Jones finishes Kansas 32nd. So you got to remember, he was in dirty air the entire race because he was multiple laps down because they could not get the right rear tire off. But 13th best at Charlotte. 24th best at Kansas, but with a grain of salt due to the tire issue. 11th best at Darlington. 13th best at Dover. You know, Eric Jones is a guy that I want to look at this weekend. I think he is a very good price as well. Bubba Wallace, we'll see what he can bring to the table. I'm sure they're going to be him and Kurt Busch are both in play. I'm not too concerned about that. As I said, I'm not very interested in Cindric. I'm not interested in Austin Dillon. I think Austin Dillon is a much better guy when it comes to some of the short tracks and stuff this year, and some of the more races that you can't really fall back at, if that makes sense. Like Martinsville, ran well at Martinsville. And you got to remember, like, a lot of people, look, Austin Dillon got saved. And Austin Dillon was optimal last weekend because he pitted. If you look back at the stats, and if you were looking back at the race in real time, Austin Dillon's, all the fast laps Austin Dillon got that kept him in the optimal came because he pitted. He had new tires. He got all those fast laps late in the race. And so really, without those fast laps and him finishing, you know, where did he finish? 24th, 25th? I don't know if he's necessarily optimal there. Thankfully, we don't have to really worry about Austin Dillon again until next week at Indy. Chris Buescher and RFK Racing, $6,800. When we look at Charlotte, 15th best at Charlotte, 30th best at Kansas, 26th best at Dover, 22nd best at Darlington, 7th best at Dover. Just gonna wait and see. This is a situation where Ricky Stenhouse talked about it on the broadcast. They were saying that they have just not been able to understand the short tracks, to understand the road courses, to just understand what to do with this car when it's a slow track. But we're back at intermediates, $6,600, ladies and gentlemen. Entering this week, Stenhouse is my favorite guy. Run the Xfinity Series race, going to be a huge, huge learning experience. When we look at how he's ran, I think people forget how good Stenhouse was at intermediate tracks this year. Look, 12th best at Charlotte, 12th best at Kansas, 15th best at Darlington. When we look back even earlier in the year, 16th best at Las Vegas, 8th best at Fontana. I know we're all the way back at Fontana, but ladies and gentlemen, this is not the Stenhouse we've been seeing stuck in the back of the field. We are back at a real racetrack. We are back at a place where I expect Stenhouse to run very well, and I think he could pay off the $6,600 price tag very easily. I'm going to be very high on Stenhouse this weekend. I like him. People have been burned by him for the last 6 races. These were not the times to play Stenhouse. We are back to a track that leans towards JDT Daughtery racing. Let's play some Stenhouse here, ladies and gentlemen. Come on. And when we look back at how Stenhouse has performed at this track, oh my gosh, I understand he got a 38th place finish in the second race last year. When we look back at his consistent career at Pocono, he's a 15th place driver, man. 15th, 17th place driver. Even back when he was, going all the way back to 2017. Let's look back at every single one of these since 2017, the fall race there. 16th, 14th, 22nd, 32nd, 21st, 17th, 15th, 15th, 38th. Stenhouse, my favorite play entering this weekend. There's the pick for you. Michael McDowell, wait and see approach. Kind of same argument with Stenhouse. Seem to be performing better at intermediate tracks, but Stenhouse is a much better play over him. I have no real clue what to do right now with Cole Custer. I am hoping that tire test data does help him out, but we're just going to have to see. I don't think Cole Custer is viable. I think Justin Haley is very much in play. Very, very much a 50-50 chance of being fine or having a mechanical issue. When we look back, pretty much the last couple months, ran very poorly at Charlotte. That's a concern. Ran very poorly at Kansas when he got involved in a wreck. That's a concern. 18th best at Darlington, 12th best at Dover. That's really all we got to lean towards Haley. We're going to have to see what he's doing in terms of practice speed. Harrison Burton, probably going to be too expensive. We've seen that they have changed the DraftKings, that is, has changed the lower end of the value range this weekend, and it makes it interesting. Like last week wasn't that much of a shock that you had to play certain guys, but this situation where, due to the fact that who we have at the bottom and what their prices are, it makes the bottom really hard to play this week. Like BJ McLeod, not going to work this week. Not enough laps. While this race can be volatile, I just don't see BJ McLeod working, and he's $4,700. That is very tight, very rough. Balicki, probably going to be slow. I don't see him getting around, those 17 points that we look for these 4K plays at the bare minimum. I don't see that happening. Can't play him. I don't see JJ Yaley getting anywhere close to 24, 25 points to be value. Actually, he needs 25 points, but I don't see him getting there at $5,000. We can't use JJ Yaley. Same thing with Cody Ware. We can't use Cody Ware. So it really does, like, I understand what DraftKings is trying to do, but in order to, I would argue that we need BJ McLeod at $4,500, and we need JJ Yaley and Josh Balicki at $4,600 and $4,700, and then a gap between them from like $4,800. Don't have anybody at $48. Don't have anybody at $49, and then start the 5K range at $5,100 with Gillen, with LaJoy, with Ty Dillon. I think that's how we solve the issue of having, just 36 cars in there and being able to use the 4K range, because at this point they're just useless. Anyway, Todd Gillen, probably going to be the play that everybody goes to, because if anything, whenever DraftKings removes the lower end of the salary, they just create more chalk in the 5K range, and so Gillen should be the play. He's by far the best driver of not the rookies, rather, but of Burton, Dillon, LaJoy, and Gillen. It's Gillen every day. They're actually bringing decent cars. Ty Dillon at $5,800 is far too expensive. Harrison Burton at $6,000, far too expensive. LaJoy is a terrible race car driver. He's really making Alan Kawicki proud. Right out of his shop and running this dog shit. So we can't use LaJoy, Gregson, and Gillen, the only two viable plays in the 5K range this week. And so that makes it very interesting, because when we're looking at the 5K range, there's no 5K range other than Gillen and Gregson. When we look at the value range, there's no plays other than Gregson and Gillen. When we look at the value plays, really around the 6K range, maybe Haley. I like Stenhouse. Stenhouse is $6,600. So who does that remove? Let's really be aggressive here. Removes BJ, removes Balicki, removes Yaley, removes Ware, removes LaJoy, removes Ty Dillon, removes Harrison Burton. Kind of removes Haley for this example. Kind of removes Custer. Kind of removes McDowell. That's 10 drivers, 10 plays, and realistically probably 7. But 10 drivers just removed, not able to be used, not optimal, not even worth putting in the lines. And so that makes this week very, very chalky at the low end. Regardless of how Gillen and Gregson qualify, unless Dillon starts last, unless Burton starts last, which I don't see happening unless they wreck in practice, ownership is going to be very condensed in the value range. Now, with that said, I think it's going to be very easy to get different up top, different in the middle of your lines, but just be aware that I think the value range is going to be chalky, and I think you eat that chalk. Value chalk in this situation with only 2 viable guys down there, you eat it, you just move on and build from there. So when we see Gillen, I think Gillen pushed like 30% this week. So when we see that, I'm not concerned about it. I'm not going to be afraid. That is just where I'm at. when we look at the optimal lines last year, clearly the second race in terms of optimal, in terms of what we can expect, we have to throw that optimal out because so many guys have place differential baked in, and pricing was already out before that race. And same thing with the first race, because we knew the qualifying, we knew the start before they got there last year. And so we can look back at the race and understand how they played out in terms of strategy and stuff, but when we're looking at them in terms of this is what the optimal might look like, it's not going to be comparable to what this year's looks like. When we look 3 years ago, Eric Jones had all that baked in place differential. We're seeing place differential baked in from 3 races ago with Hamlin plus 18, Eric Jones plus 35, Harvick plus 18, Elliott 21, Hamlin 13, Bowman 18. I don't think we're necessarily going to see that place differential baked in. And the reason it's not that I'm avoiding looking at these types of optimal lines, but compared to how we've seen it this year, and granted they're going to have their group qualifying, so we're going to have some place differential baked in the teens. But we're seeing quite a lot of place differential baked in for guys who have been optimal before that I don't think we'll see again. Like for example, 5 races ago, we had William Byron plus 27 positions, Larson plus 18, Blaney plus 20, Jimmy Johnson plus 17, Chris Buescher plus 17, Austin Dillon plus 15. These are gigantic. And these aren't optimal. I'm just talking about final, like, DraftKings points that these guys are getting. These guys are having absolute mass. Here, I haven't put this on screen. Sorry. Like 5 races ago, like look at the place differential just baked into some of these lines, and so if anything, I think it leans more towards this type of distribution in terms of points. I mean, like look, you can't use half the field, and we already have around 7-10 guys that just aren't going to be viable at all. Kind of the same thing. If you project people bare minimum, I would say 35 again, which I think that needs to pretty much be where you're at. Like, and when I say that, because I've had some questions because I've been mentioned. So like when I do my projections, I put them on PDF and stuff and upload them. Go ahead and copy those and put them into a spreadsheet, into a Google Drive, and then just sort it by total DraftKings points. If they're near 30 or above, clearly they're gonna be a top half scorer based on my projections. But if they're not close to 30, 35, I'm not playing them. That's just how it goes through. And so I think that's another aspect that some people don't look at in terms of projections, or in terms of trying to look at lines and figure out what they want to do to build lines and stuff. It might rain. I'm sorry if I'm very dark. My light has all but gone out because it is very cloudy. Let's continue to go back and just look at these distributions. I mean, I don't even remember what the hell happened in this race. But this is insane for Pocono. Look at all this, man. Look at all this place differential baked in. Oops. Some still place differential baked in. And if we do, and this is why I like having all this data here. As I said, if you want to view this, you can support me, support Pearce, and the Patreon below. Really, what this is doing is saving you time and effort, so you don't have to sit at your computer, so you don't have to pull practice data, so you don't have to go through tons and tons of stuff to find the old optimals and the old total DraftKings points. Look, NFL season is right around the corner, and an example that I need to start using is that a lot of these pros. Now, I'm not throwing pro around very loosely. Guys who enter $25,000 plus an NFL weekend, most of them outsource either scraping or some, not projections rather, but something to get data together. Sometimes they get people from Europe to do it. Sometimes they get people who aren't interested in sports to do it. Whatever the case is, when you're entering that much money, time is very valuable. And if you can get somebody else to do stuff like this, it's very helpful. I'm not saying we're on that level of being paid by, a guy who enters $100,000 on an NFL weekend. But this type of stuff will save you a ton of time and effort. So you can just log, especially when NFL season is around and you don't have 4 hours a week to dig into NASCAR. You can just load this and very quickly go through old races and stuff. But yeah. So anyway, looking through other guys that I think might be viable, or at least builds that might be viable. I really, really, really like William Byron. I'm telling you, I really like Ricky Stenhouse Jr. I think those guys are probably going to be in a lot of my lines unless things just go haywire and I see reasons to not play them. I think Suarez at $7,900 is a very good play, and due to the fact that we really don't have a bottom salary or like a really, really deep value plays this week, from like $6,500 down, you're going to be in the 7K range a lot. You're going to be in the 8K range a lot. You're going to be in the 9 range a lot. 9K range a lot. So I like the idea of playing Gillen. Some guys in the 7K range, some guys in the 8K range, and fit in whatever you can in the in the 10K. I'm going downhill. 10K range, based on practice, based on what you're seeing in these races. If I have to give the early picks on this Thursday evening, I like Kyle Busch. I like Hamlin. I like Truex. I like Kyle Busch the most out of those three. I like Chastain. I love William Byron. I like Christopher Bell. I like Alex Bowman. I like Suarez. Those are the not priority targets, but guys that I have a ton of interest in right now. Past that, I think Elliott is going to have a very interesting team, certainly because pit road and fuel strategy is going to have a ton is going to play a lot into how this race plays out. But those are the guys that I have the most interest in right now. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for supporting me, supporting Pearce and everything. And I'm sorry for no live shows these last 2 weekends, but I'm back this week. I'll do the live shows. I'll be here, and let's have some fun. Let's kind of rekindle this relationship and see if I can get you guys to stick around live shows. So I will see you guys later. Thank you for watching and being here.